Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give an overview of the Cassava Livelihoods and Value Chain program on behalf of all of our partners. By way of introduction, the Cassava Value Chains and Livelihood program consists of two interlinked projects supported by ACIAR. The first is developing cassava production and marketing systems to enhance smallholder livelihoods in Cambodia and Laos PDR, which is supported under the Social Science program of ACIAR, and the second is developing value chain linkages to enhance the adoption of profitable and sustainable cassava production systems in Vietnam and Indonesia, which is supported under the Agribusiness Research Program of ACIAR. The overall aim of the program is to analyse the socioeconomic conditions under which improved technology and market booms in commercial crops such as cassava can be harnessed to increase the profitability and sustainability of smallholder farming systems in Southeast Asia and thereby contribute to poverty reduction. So to achieve this aim, there are three interlinked objectives of the program. The first is to assess opportunities and constraints of smallholder production and marketing of cassava within different value chains. The second objective is to increase the adoption of improved cassava production and processing technologies through strengthening linkages between value chain actors and support actors. And the third objective is to develop policy recommendations and facilitate learning alliances for the development of sustainable cassava industry and improvement in rural livelihoods. The program has been working across a wide variety of sites across Southeast Asia. Aceh in Cambodia, North Sumatra in Indonesia, Nusa Tenggara Timur in Indonesia, Sayabuli in Laos, Olakamsai in Laos, Sơn La in Vietnam, Dak Lak in Vietnam, and also some supplementary activities in the Irrawaddy Delta in Myanmar. Across the different sites that the program is operating in, there are a wide variety of different types of value chains with different commercialization levels, ranging from the highly commercialized value chains that exist in Daglak and North Sumatra, right through to the less commercialized, more self-contained value chain systems that operate in places like Sika in Nusa Tenggara Timur. So under Objective 1, the project has concentrated on analysing the drivers and dynamics of global and local markets. And those activities are ongoing, and information about global and local cassava markets is shared with a wide range of stakeholders, particularly through our Facebook group. Under Objective 1 also, we completed value chain analysis at all the different sites, farmer focus group discussions, and training in household surveys and implementing household surveys. So those activities were completed in 2016-2017. Under Objective 2, variety trials, fertiliser trials, intercropping trials and other trials have been completed in all sites. We managed to have 4 seasons of trials in Indonesia and 3 seasons of trials in Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. As you know, the program was extended by 6 months, and that enabled us to have another season of trials and to harvest the trials and get the results. So the results of these trials have been discussed with farmers and with value chain stakeholders at farmer field days and at provincial level and at national level during stakeholder workshops and meetings, and also at regional research symposia. So Objective 3 has been the main concentration of our activities in 2018 and 2019. So this includes active involvement of government and private sector stakeholders in project activities, including trials, including field days, and the development and evaluation of business models that involve the government and private sector. And also information sharing at local and national level workshops, at research symposia, at conferences and through training activities, as well as knowledge sharing and discussion in the website and the Facebook group. Over the coming days, you'll hear from the partners from different countries involved in the Cassava value chain program about the findings of their research, but I'd like to give you just some summarized findings here. So in terms of agronomy, at almost all of the sites across all the countries, the agronomic trials were able to identify improved varieties, improved fertilizer practices or other agronomic practices that did lead to improved yields and sustainable economic benefits for farmers under real field conditions. We found that the potential for transfer and adoption of technology by farmers in all of the sites is dependent on the characteristics of the technology, but it's also dependent on the characteristics of the value chain that exists and also the agroecological conditions that prevail. There was no one-size-fits-all model in terms of involvement of the private sector or involvement of government or involvement of NGOs for promoting technology adoption. It was all quite site-specific. In terms of technologies, improved varieties and to a lesser extent appropriate fertilizer application were technologies that had the most potential for transfer and uptake. They're easily observable, it's easy to see the results. Farmers across all of the sites showed great interest in particular in adopting improved varieties. The conservation agriculture practices and intercropping gained very little traction with stakeholders. These are less easily observable. They're long-term benefits to be gained, of course, but they're not immediately observable. So this had a relatively lower level of interest from farmers. And also there was relatively lower levels of incentive for the private sector to get involved with dissemination of those technologies. Pests and diseases are a major problem across all of the sites that we operate in. And pest and disease control and supply of clean planting materials has strong public good aspects and can certainly lead to sustainable improvements in smallholder livelihoods. But in terms of involving private sector to disseminate clean planting materials, if there's a high level of competition between factories, then there's a very low profit incentive for individual factories to supply clean planting materials. In this case, there's a need for collective action on behalf of processors, for example, through associations, or for the government or NGOs to intervene. We also found that policies that are seemingly relatively unrelated to cassava production can have a major distorting effect on the performance of cassava value chains and transfer of technologies. For example, heavily subsidized fertilizer for rice in Indonesia and the policies around loading and unloading of trucks at the border between Cambodia and Vietnam, both relatively unrelated to cassava production, but both have extremely strong impacts on transfer of technologies through value chains for cassava production. We found that private sector incentives to invest in extending technology to smallholders are strongest when there's a natural or regulated monopsony situation. But even in these cases, there's still a need for support and facilitation by an honest broker or by local government if sustainable linkages to smallholders are to develop. This is especially the case in many of the countries we work in where government plays a strong role in the planning processes and also in the agricultural development processes. So in terms of future orientation beyond the life of this program, in North Sumatra, farmers are extremely interested in adopting Malang 4 variety, which has been introduced by the program. And the factory that we've been working with is very interested in disseminating this variety through its agent trader network, and indeed has been piloting this through the life of the program. But it's still at the early stage yet, and we'll still need a continuing partnership with researchers to continue bringing planting material to North Sumatra until there's a critical mass of farmers who are able to multiply and supply their own planting material. In Nusa Tenggara Timur, there's potential for a new animal feed production enterprises to source cassava from the local area, but it will need ongoing support from local government and researchers to ensure the supply of suitable varieties, at least in the short term. Farmers who grow cassava for their own consumption are also very interested in getting high-yielding eating varieties for their own consumption. But this will need longer-term involvement from both government in terms of planning and also research in terms of developing high-yielding eating varieties of cassava that are suitable for dissemination to Nusa Tenggara Timor. In Karachi and Cambodia, disease is a serious problem and there's a lack of clean planting materials available. 2 private factories in the local area have failed to start operating successfully, and Vietnamese factories that source cassava from Cambodia across the border lack incentive to support dissemination of clean planting materials because there's a high level of competition between them and because there are breaks in the value chain at the border. While obviously clean planting materials and freedom from disease has strong public good aspects in eastern Cambodia, strong support from NGOs and government will be needed to ensure supply of clean planting materials and improve varieties, as currently there's really a lack of incentive for the private sector to get involved. In Bolikamsai in Laos, the factory in Bolikamsai is in competition with chip processors but doesn't face competition from other starch processors. The factory is willing to expand their production and work with more farmers, and already has indicated that they'll work with government and researchers to support a rapid multiplication tunnel to ensure supply of high-yielding varieties. So this work will continue beyond the life of this program. In Sai Bulian in Laos and in Sơn La in Vietnam, the starch factories in both locations are in a similar situation. They have a relatively short processing season and they're operating at full capacity during this season. So there's no incentive for them to support dissemination of high-yielding varieties as their factories are already full. What they do, the factories do have an incentive to support continuing work with researchers and government to develop and disseminate varieties that would enable them to process over a longer period of time. And finally, in Dak Lak in Vietnam, there's been an increase in the number of starch factories within the province. There are now around 11 starch factories competing for cassava roots within the province. This higher level of competition has led to some factory closures, and many of the factories are now operating at less than full capacity. And there's limited to no incentive for the individual factories to disseminate new high-yielding varieties to farmers, as there's no guarantee that the factories would recoup their investments through increased throughput of fresh roots, as there's no guarantee that the farmers would sell to them. The most effective method of getting private sector involvement in dissemination would be for the factories to form an association and to act collectively. That way that they would all collectively disseminate improved high-yielding varieties, and collectively they would all benefit from greater throughput in their factories. Finally, I'd just like to highlight some achievements of the program that were not included in the initial design of the program. The first is that Myanmar isn't included officially in the program, but since 2017 we've been operating on an unofficial basis in the Irrawaddy Delta division in Myanmar, doing field trials and having engagement with industry and government. This has been very successful, and you'll hear more later in the week from our colleagues in Myanmar about their activities. The second achievement is that we had 2 interns working in the project, also kindly supported by ACIAR, and they developed some interesting tools, including a pilot online marketplace for cassava, which you can find on our website too. It's called Chokwai, means cassava marketplace. In addition, we also held 2 regional research symposiums, one in 2018 in Vientiane in Laos, which was in conjunction with our midterm review, and the second last year in North Sumatra. And neither of these research symposia were in the initial project design, but they were certainly well worthwhile to conduct, and they brought together a wide range of stakeholders from government, from industry, and from research from all across Southeast Asia to discuss. We also have all of the presentations and discussions are available on the website, and also as proceedings document from ACIAR. And finally, in Vietnam, in addition to other activities, we also held provincial project stakeholder workshops in June and July to finalize activities of the project and to disseminate results further at a local level. So once again, I'd like to thank all of the partners that are involved in this program and ACIAR for funding the program.